I will try to be briefly because we took a little bit more time in the previous discussion. But the lecture I'm giving to you today is called Vaccine Diplomacy in Mexico, and we will try also to put it in the context of Latin America, especially with the current COVID-19 pandemic. Um, just to say, this is part of one research that we are currently doing in our university to analyze what are the political and diplomatic measures that the Mexican that are taking place in Mexico against COVID-19, and also in the case of other infectious diseases and other epidemics. No, because I said it's not something new. COVID-19, it's something that we have seen in history over the time. Let me start with just saying that vaccines itself, they are a traditional vehicle of international cooperation. Uh, because infectious diseases are in general a global threat. There is no infectious diseases that is just closer to one specific country, and because they are infectious, it's very easy that they widespread across borders, and they become a regional program. No? Infections outbreaks don't recognize borders. No? And global health means also that there will be interdependence between countries. One country itself cannot fight a disease. It has to be in cooperation with other countries, at least just to keep the outbreaks as small as possible. No? Human health is to be seen as a human right. This is something that we have in our international agreements in the multilateral arena, and of course, it has to be to get more than the paper itself. No, we have to as governments, as states, to guarantee this human right, and one form of guaranteeing this is, of course, to have science diplomacy initiatives that can promote solutions to fight infectious outbreaks, for example, epidemics and pandemics across. So what is the conclusion of this forethought? Well, that vaccines, in fact, are a product of scientific development, and not all countries have vaccine research and production capacities. Therefore, the vaccine will be a vehicle of international cooperations for all the countries, and it's not that we all have to have a vaccine produced by ourselves. It's just that we will have to engage in international cooperations to get the vaccines. It could be for COVID-19, it could be for tuberculosis, it could be for malaria, it could be for any of these steps. What is the challenge? Well, vaccines, they have a cost, of course, but in order for countries to cooperate, they have to be also affected. So in the case of diseases that are only of the global south, we have a problem there because they will not raise as much as awareness as, for example, COVID-19 has risen. But of course, we have to think what we can learn from history and what we can learn from the experiences of other countries, especially countries in the global south like us. And that is something that I want to share with you in this presentation. How, for example, Mexico has developed some science diplomacy tools and some vaccine production tools in the past and in the present that can help to fight COVID-19 currently, but also can help us to see how we can develop scientific capacities for vaccine production and vaccine diplomacy. Okay, the next one is, well, you know, the first big vaccination expedition was not done in the global north. In fact, it was done in the Spanish Empire. We are thinking about smallpox. And you know, smallpox to that day is not the vaccine that was developed by Jenner. It was more about variolization. But in fact, the Spanish Empire started this Balmis and Sendal global vaccination expedition, which was called the philanthropic expedition already in 1803 to 1806. And you see, it was an expedition that was able to variolate most of the territory in Latin America. No? So this is one of the antecedents of the historical background that we have to say, well, vaccines is not just a thing of the Anglo-Saxon countries, of the Germany, or of for example, of the United Kingdom. No, in fact, also Spanish-speaking countries were already an advantage into vaccination from the very past. And this, for example, what you see here in our screen is the Maria Pita ship, which was that one responsible of variolizating of these kids. Just as an historical fact, uh, what was variolization? Well, you have something that was ill of smallpox, and you have to took this person with you, and they take from the scars of these persons a little bit, and then put it in another person, and then will develop some immunity about this. So Dr. Balmis was a Spanish doctor, which was together with the nurse Isabel Sendal. So this doctor and this nurse were responsible to doing the variolization in all the South American subcontinent in already 200 years ago. No, is something important to say. And then we saw that vaccination itself became a tool of science diplomacy and global projections for many countries. For Spain, at that time, it was very important and was globally recognized. But already during the 19th century, after Edward Jenner developed his vaccines against smallpox, a big figure appears into our history, and is the figure of Louis Pasteur. And Louis Pasteur was the responsible of developing most of the vaccines and the production mechanism for these vaccines. You know, if you go to the Pasteur Institute in Paris, you will see a very, very big monument to Louis Pasteur. And Louis Pasteur was not only the vaccine that was what France was exporting to the world, but also the figure of a scientist as a figure of progress and development. Louis Pasteur said, "Science knows no country because knowledge belongs to humanity and is a torch which illuminates the world." And it's a little bit like paraphrasing the words of Dr. Walla, our global language is science. No? Well, what happened in Latin America and in Mexico? Well, the first vaccine that was applied, the first modern vaccine that was applied in Mexico and therefore also in Latin America was the anti-rabies vaccine. And the anti-rabies vaccine was a commission that Dr. Eduardo Lisiaga, which is the man that you see on the left, was the director of the General Hospital in Mexico City in the 19th century. Well, he went to the president and said, "The president, you know, we have a problem with the rabies. No? Many people are getting ill. What can we do?" Dr. Lisiaga said, the Mexican president. "No, well, I have a correspondence with Dr. Pasteur in France, and he has the vaccine. We have to get the vaccines." The president said to Dr. Lisiaga, "Okay, you have all the resources you need. You go and get the vaccines." Dr. Lisiaga went to the Pasteur Institute in Paris, make a short stay there for 3 weeks, and came back in a ship with a bunny, you know, because in the brain of the bunny, it was the the rabies virus inoculated, and then he took the bunny to Mexico, and then they were able to produce the anti-rabies vaccines already in the General Hospital of Mexico City. This was a very, very good thing because it strengthened the relationships between France and between Mexico, of course, but as you see, it didn't took as much time as the COVID-19 vaccine. It was much more straightforward because, why? Because the scientists had a direct connection with the decision maker. and that was enabling to, for example, solve a local problem, which was the anti-rabies vaccine. Also, of course, with to this time, it was important for France to promote himself globally through the science and the scientific advantages that it was being developed. Okay, well, the next. And then we already come to the 20th century. This is just another historical context about how Mexico developed vaccination capacities during the late 20th century, especially 1950 to 1980. Another great physician, Dr. Jesus Cumate, was the one responsible to develop the vaccination schemes, not only in Mexico, but also in Latin America itself. Well, what he did is that he consolidated a universal vaccination programs in measles, dengue, cholera, poliomyelitis, malaria, smallpox, ornithobacterium, and also tuberculosis. Smallpox, as you know, is one of the great achievements of humankind because we were able uh, to eradicate it mostly. We extinguished the virus. Now there are only two uh, laboratories in the world that keep the smallpox virus itself, but it was a large. No? Then we said, why we can't do this with COVID-19? Well, of course, this is part of a thesis that I will tell you in the next slides, but maybe we don't have the same international solidarity today with COVID-19 that we had in the past to fight smallpox. And this is also that we don't have the solidarity enough to fight all these measles, dengue, cholera, and malaria, and to take them out from our world, no, that we have in the past. Well, Dr. Jesus Cumate was able to consolidate these universal vaccination programs, and Mexico itself was doing science diplomacy because it was exporting the procedures on how to vaccinate people. No, for example, there is some interesting anecdotic here. How did Jesus Cumate do the vaccination all across the country of Mexico if it was very difficult to do that? Imagine the cold chain, everything that logistic that you need to do the vaccination. Well, he said to the former Mexican president once, the way that I was able to do that is because I made empathy with the commissioners of the health ministry that were in all parts of the territory. He was doing science diplomacy. He made a bet. I will be able to vaccinate all of Mexico, and if not, I will have to buy a champagne bottle for every commissioner. So it was like 50 commissioners across the country. Well, at the end, he was successful, and he was buying 51 bottles of champagne, one for each commissionate and one for himself. No? So it's one of these anecdotes. But as I said, no, as a scientist, you have to be empathic. You have to make some policy as well, and you have to explain the people why it's important what you are doing. No. Well, now we come to the present. COVID-19 is the first pandemic of the 20th century, but we are facing new geopolitics and new cultural values. No? One different thing is that the balance of power across the world has changed. No? Now we don't see, for example, the United States and the Soviet Union fighting for the hegemonic power across different regions of the world. What we see is that we have new countries that are claiming this hegemonic power, but in a different way. And this, of course, has to do with that the multilateral agenda, for example, the United Nations, is a little bit more weak than in the past. So it doesn't have the force to implement great vaccination campaigns or make big awareness about different diseases, like, for example, in the past. No? If it was the case, then we would already have been able to fight, for example, some uh, some important pandemics that were already before COVID-19, for example, tuberculosis, or for example, dengue or malaria. No? But COVID-19 is now important because it's pandemic, it's everywhere, no? And it's everywhere and it's affecting the interest of different countries. So everywhere people is concerned about COVID-19. More than 99 millions of people are confirmed globally to have become ill of COVID. And in Mexico alone, it has been around 1 million and 700,000 of them. You know? But we have also some cultural challenges. For example, the personal hesitation to vaccination. Many people, they don't want to be vaccinated. And one is thinking, why in the past they wanted to be vaccinated and today no? Oh, of course, because in the past, the governments and the multilateral system were legitimated to tell the people, you have to go vaccinated. And the people, they have some moral responsibility and some civil responsibility, and they were doing vaccinated. Now, the anti-vaccination campaign is very strong, and it could be a very big challenge to really fight COVID-19 as it has to be fighting. No? For example, if if only if more than 80% of the global population gets vaccinated, then we will be able to speak about a successful anti-COVID campaign, because we're speaking of a pandemic, of something that is everywhere. No? Only if 80% of the people around the world are vaccinated, then we will be able to control the outbreaks and the new variants of the virus. This is very important. No? And then, of course, other thing, COVID-19 is also that we have to look after other diseases that can become as endemic together with the coronavirus. For example, all the respiratory diseases like tuberculosis or like dengue, or these diseases that are affecting the epithelia. Well, this could become a general problem of health in many countries, especially in developing countries, because we will have two outbreaks at the same time. No? And now, of course, we have also to make some pressure, not only in the COVID-19 vaccine, but also in the employment of tuberculosis vaccine, of malaria vaccine, etc., etc. No? Okay. But what is the problem? Again, no vaccine research and development capacities in the global south. No? What are we going to do? Well, for example, in Mexico, we have seen interesting things. New stakeholder for vaccine diplomacy. It's not anymore the health ministry or the science agency which is making her voice speaking for the deployment of vaccine. Is, for example, the foreign affairs ministry and the embassies. What you see in the picture is the permanent representative of Mexico in the United Nations, Dr. Ramon de la Fuente, who is a physician and was the former president of the National University in Mexico. Well, what they developed is that they started already in April of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic was starting. Mexico started an agreement within the G20, which resulted in a General Assembly resolution of the United Nations, especially you can search for it, the 74, which was to say that all nations will cooperate to have equally access to medical resources against the COVID-19 pandemics, because it was already being seen that the developed countries were about to see for their citizens first and then for the world. But this was like not recognizing that this was a global problem, no? It was a little bit more, well, how do you say it, egoistic, you know it? So Mexico advantaged this resolution, of course, in the United Nations, that every country will have equal access to medical infrastructure and so on. No? On hand of it, the Mexican government also implemented a scientific advisory committee on vaccine diplomacy. This in order to help the country purchase some vaccines uh, from abroad, but also see if the vaccines are to be implemented in Mexico. No? And this is the way that Mexico joined COVAX mechanism on August 2031 under the modality of optional purchase of 24 million of doses. This is still not enough. Mexico has around 130 million inhabitants, and we don't have vaccination production capacity. We have to purchase from abroad. And but here's how science diplomacy is helping us to at least have some of these vaccines in our country. Well, what other has happened? Of course, it has already started a little bit late. That some people said, why don't we have a Mexican vaccine, for example? No, and in order to develop a vaccine, it can you take years. It's not the time to do that, but it's the time to start thinking why we in the past had this capacity, we lost it, we have to recover this capacity. No, so some networks and strategic alliances are becoming now something clear now in order to develop vaccination capacities for the future. For example, local governments such as the governor of Mexico City, the governor of the state of Hidalgo, where we are trying to build also the synchrotron light source, the National University, Carlos Slim Foundation, which is one of the richest men in the world, and of course, pharmaceutical like Lemons, they are taking new initiatives to make, like, for example, a vaccination pilot plant in the state of Hidalgo, Or for example, this coalition of epidemic preparedness innovation, which is trying to make an own vaccine against COVID. Well, this is interesting because it was not happening in the past. Some conclusions, and then we can also open to some questions. It's a very big topic. We could speak of this a lot, but my conclusions are following. The multilateral systems are weakened, and the global south countries don't have a vaccine developing capacities. This is a problem. It's a survival problem for our countries. Most emergent and re-emergent infection diseases still don't get proper attention from the global community. For example, tuberculosis. We are very aware of COVID-19, but tuberculosis is something that it has to matter us, and nobody is paying attention to it. Even the UN had already a high-level meeting on tuberculosis, but real solutions has not been implemented. Russia and China have become key stakeholders of vaccine diplomacy outside multilateral system, and the US and the European Union are losing leadership. Now, Russia and China are exporting more vaccines to the global south than the US and the European Union. They are first taking care of their own populations. Mexico tries to build a leadership in the multilateral mechanism as only chance to provide vaccines. It's the only thing that we as poor countries can do. We have to rebuild the multilateral mechanism because it's the mechanism that will allow us to have a voice in the concert of the nations to tell the other people, please help us with our problems of everyone, global problems. COVID-19 impacted science diplomacy in Mexico in a positive way. Yes, this is something interesting. It's not that COVID-19 is something positive, but it makes awareness about science diplomacy. It has illuminated the social value of scientific knowledge and the value of scientists in the public agenda. Now scientists are becoming something important in Mexico and are seeing as a special part of the governance to do important projects. The diversification of stakeholders enriches the required ecosystem for science diplomacy by reaching new audience at different political levels. This is very, very, very important. You have to diversify your ecosystem, say science diplomacy is important to everyone, and then you will reach new audience at the political level. I'm saying that because usually in the science diplomacy ecosystems, we're only speaking among us, but we have to speak with other people as well. And finally, new leaders in the science can better engage the Latin American region, and I think this can also apply, for example, for the Middle East or for Asia, through science-based cooperation initiative, not exclusively towards the COVID-19 vaccines, but also let's start thinking into other relevant issues of common regional interest in the science diplomacy agenda. For example, other infectious diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, etc. Well, just to finish, some acknowledgements to my team. In this case, these are scholars that are involved in this chair of science diplomacy and heritage at the National University in Mexico, Dr. Judith Ibaduiza, who is an expert in community participation, Dr. Brenda Valderrama, who was the former science ministry of the state of Morelos and also expert in these topics, and Marga Gual Soler, which maybe you already know, a very famous expert in science diplomacy itself. Thank you very much, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, my dear Parsifal. A very interesting lecture about COVID-19 and the vaccines. And you know, I'm a little bit hesitating to take my vaccination. That's why I'm a doctor and a medical doctor, but I hear some bad thoughts about who vaccinated and who take vaccine side effects, and this is dilemma. So we have now 2 minutes for Paul. I will give your some questions. Only 2 minutes, and I launch now the poll question. So first question: you see the poll or no? You start seeing the questions.
Okay.
Please stop sharing your screen, Dr. Parsifal.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Yes, any participant sees the questions now?
Yes.
No
so
one,
you mean
no one sees the question?
Oh, yes, some question.
Yes, is only 3 questions. Please answer. Choose answer. Yes, I see only 1. Yes, 2. And please, Dr. Parsifal, correct the answers for participant.